The Law of Self-Defense content you are about to enjoy is presented for general educational purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice. If you are in need of legal advice, consult competent legal counsel in the relevant jurisdiction. Hey folks, welcome to today's Law of Self-Defense members only content. I am, of course, Attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense. And today I'd like to share with you news about some new rules of engagement when defending against rioters, looters, and arsonists. These particular new rules of engagement apply specifically in the states of Florida and Oklahoma, but hopefully serve as model statutes for other states to follow. And I should mention that both states' recently adopted laws do more than just change how you as a defender can interact with rioters, looters, arsonists, but have far-reaching changes for how the law will deal with people guilty of rioting, looting, and arson. So let's start with Florida first. The new rules of engagement adopted by Florida for defending against and for the government to deal with rioters, looters, and arsonists became effective only last week on April 19th, 2021, an historical, relevant date that any American ought to know well, of course, as the battles of Lexington and Concord were fought on that date in 1775. The new law was adopted in the form of Legislative Bill HB 1, a copy of which I've embedded in the text version of today's post. It must be said, however, that HB 1 does a lot of heavy lifting in one bill. It gets a great deal done. The newly adopted Florida legislation doesn't actually change any of the state's justified use of force laws per se. Instead, it does things like prohibit the obstruction of public roads by protesters. It broadens the scope of what qualifies as criminal conduct in the context of assault, battery, and certain property crimes, such as looting, and increases the penalties for much of this conduct in the context of a riot. So it's covering things like assault, aggravated assault, battery, aggravated battery, either of those, any of those, assault or battery of first responders, police, or EMS. It covers criminal mischief, it covers theft. In this context, we really mean looting, and a lot more. It also enhances punishment for damage to historical monuments. It creates civil liability for town governments that fail to protect their people or property in the context of a riot. It requires state approval for any local defund the police efforts. It creates a new statute that prohibits mob intimidation. Another new statute that prohibits online intimidation or online publication of identifying information. It creates a new statute that provides for civil immunity from a suit over damages sought by someone engaged in a riot. For example, a rioter who may have been struck by a fleeing person's vehicle. It provides revised definitions of affray, riot, and aggravated riot. And very importantly, it provides that for many of the acts of misconduct covered by HB 1, bail will not be immediately available to the accused until they have appeared in court. This will prevent the current practice of immediate release of offenders, allowing them to promptly re-engage in further rioting, looting, and arson. As I said, a lot of heavy lifting done with that one bill, and as promised, I've embedded that bill, HB 1, in the text version of today's content. Now let's take a look at Oklahoma. So unfortunately, unlike the Florida law just discussed, which has already taken legal effect last week, the new Oklahoma rules of engagement with respect to rioters, looters, and arsonists will not take effect until November 1st, 2021, so months from now. Nevertheless, Oklahoma Bill HB 1674, just signed by the governor, does a great deal to change the cost-benefit considerations for rioters, looters, or arsonists. For example, if any murder, maiming, robbery, rape, or arson occurs in the context of a riot, then any person involved in that riot is punishable as if they had been the individual committing the murder, maiming, robbery, rape, or arson. And while this provision may seem extreme, it's entirely consistent with the centuries-old legal principle that all persons acting collectively as an unlawful mob are responsible for the worst conduct of any individual member of the mob. The bill also provides that any rioter who obstructs an officer of the state in the performance of their legal duty, such as obstructing a police officer from maintaining order during a riot, shall be punished as a felon with a mandatory minimum of 2 years imprisonment up to a maximum of 10 years. Any rioter armed with a deadly weapon or who was disguised shall also be guilty of a felony punishable by a minimum of 2 years and a maximum of 10 years. Now, I will note, it's my recollection. I don't really claim any great expertise in First Amendment law, but it's my recollection that the U.S. Supreme Court has held that wearing a mask, a disguise, during a protest is constitutionally protected First Amendment conduct. So we'll have to see if this wearing a disguise provision holds up in court. Especially, it must be said, in this age of COVID, where mask wearing is prevalent and sometimes mandatory. The bill also provides that any person acting as a leader or facilitator of a riot is punishable as a felon, with a mandatory sentence of 2 years and a maximum of up to 20 years imprisonment. Obstruction by protesters of a public street shall be punishable as a misdemeanor with a sentence not to exceed 1 year and a fine of at least $100 and up to $5,000. They are also liable for any damages that result from their obstruction of the street, which raises the interesting possibility that a street blocking road obstructor who is struck by a vehicle may be liable for any damage to the vehicle that results from the impact. Further, HB 1674, and again, I should stress it doesn't actually take effect until November 1st, 2021, creates an entirely new statute, Statute 1320.11, that provides both criminal and civil immunity to the operator of a motor vehicle who unintentionally injures or even kills another person while fleeing from a riot, so long as the operator was exercising due care at the time. And finally, HB 1674 creates yet another new statute, 1320.12, that provides that any organization, such as Black Lives Matter or Antifa, that conspires to commit any of the newly scoped riot-relating crimes will be subject to a fine that is 10 times greater than the fine that would otherwise apply to such conduct. And again, as promised, that Oklahoma Bill 1674 is embedded in the text version of today's content. Okay, folks, I'd also like to announce a 24-hour flash sale on our best-selling course, Lawful Defense Against Rioters, Looters, and Arsonists. You can save up to 65% during this 24-hour flash sale. Folks, if you'd like to know how to lawfully defend yourself, your family, your property in the context of a riot, looting, or arson, you'd be smart to take advantage of this 24-hour flash sale on that best-selling course. For the next 24 hours, you can access that course either online streamed video or as a DVD or both, and save yourself up to 60 or 65% in the process. It's a savings of more than $120, folks. We're only running the sale concurrent with today's blog post, however. So if you're interested in learning more about that best-selling course, Lawful Defense Against Rioters, Looters, and Arsonists, I urge you to point your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/riot. All right, folks, until next time, if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun, so I'm hard to kill, my family is hard to kill, then you also owe it to yourself and your family to make sure you know the law so you're hard to convict. I'm attorney Andrew Branco with Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.